All right, good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mustafa and I'm the Head of Policy here at Business New South Wales, and it's my pleasure to be your facilitator today. I also have the amazing privilege of being a non-executive director of a not-for-profit charity myself, so this is a topic really close to my heart. Again, thank you for our members for joining us today. I'm also joined by Jennifer Moltisanti, Assistant Commissioner for Not-for-Profit and Government Experiences at the Australian Taxation Office. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of the land and waterways on which we live, work, and recognise their continuing connection to country. Today, I'm coming to you live from Chifley Square in Sydney CBD on what is a very warm end to spring. The lands of the people on which we meet today are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders, past and present. I'd also like to extend my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present on the call today. In today's webinar, we'll be going over three key elements. 1, the overview of the new ATO reporting requirements. 2, practical advice to help complete the not-for-profit self-review return. And 3, just good governance practices to help your not-for-profit keep operating smoothly. We've got audience participation today, and I'll come back a bit later with the Slido code. But again, no good tax presentation is without a good disclaimer. So I'll say this up front, and just a reminder, and I'll just leave it for there, which is Jennifer won't be able to provide any answers or comments on tax affairs of any individual or entity on the status of audits, investigations and legal proceedings that are currently before the courts. The ATO also can't comment on the development or efficacy of policy or speculate on potential law changes. So bear this in mind when you're submitting your questions. I just want to introduce Jennifer to you all. Jennifer Moltisanti is the ATO Assistant Commissioner who leads the not-for-profit and government experiences teams. Jennifer's focus is directed at strengthening the integrity of tax administration for not-for-profits and government taxpayers. She works closely with clients and intermediaries to understand how both sectors can be best supported to get tax obligations right, both now and into the future. And prior to her appointment in the ATO, Jennifer was a senior management with the Australian Customs Services. Jennifer, I might just hand over to you to kind of go through your presentation. We'll come back a bit later, take some questions. We'll put the Slido code into the chat for now and go from there.
Oh, thank you so much, Mustafa, and thank you to Business New South Wales for inviting me here today.
Thanks for coming.
I'm very excited. Like yourself, I used to be a board member on several not-for-profits, so this is something that is very close to my heart, and certainly our presentation is about helping not-for-profits get it right. And so just by way of introduction, before I go through our role, Mustafa, I would like to add to your lovely acknowledgement of country and extend my acknowledgement to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait people that are joining this meeting today. There is a presentation that I'll quickly go through, but I am very interested in hearing from the audience.
And I guess on that, we'll just the hashtag is ATO requirements. So if they do have any questions throughout the presentation, they can just put it on there. It's on the screen as well.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be amazing to put those questions through. And I'm joined by one of my technical leads here in the studio, Matthew Folters, who will be looking at the questions and sending them through, and so we can answer them. And if we don't get to your question, please, we will provide the answers to Business New South Wales so that they can be sent out. Yes?
Awesome.
Okay, so I do have a quick slide deck that I'd like to sort of whip through. And what I will say to participants on the line is that all the information that I'm going to go through on the slides, you can actually rely on. It's updated as of November of this year, and all of the information is there. There are also some really helpful links to our web content. So all you need to do is type that into Google or whatever platform you're using, and that will take you to the pages on our web so that you can get the information that you need.
Fantastic.
Yes? So shall we start?
Please do.
So, as I said, our tagline is about helping not-for-profits get it right. And right from the get-go, I do want to say that I want to take the fear out of the ATO. So hopefully, at the end of this presentation, Mustafa, you know, a lot of our not-for-profits won't be as scared as they are of the ATO. We're here to help. We really are here to help. So let's start with our roles. So I won't go through every single thing on the page, and certainly your participants can actually take these slides. But our role is really to support not-for-profits getting their tax and super obligations right, because we acknowledge the really important role that they provide in the Australian community. So one of the things that we do is that we provide advice and guidance. We have a dedicated not-for-profit contact centre. You can call 1300 130 248, and my staff, who are dedicated just for not-for-profits, will provide advice, guidance, and that advice and guidance can range from how do I set up my not-for-profit, what are my tax and super obligations, things of that nature. And they also provide endorsement to deductible gift recipient status and any tax concessions. So they are very nuanced in tax, not-for-profit tax law, and they will be able to help not-for-profits meet their obligations. So that support we provide is probably the primary function that we have in the not-for-profit centre.
And I think those contact details are at the end of the slide pack, so they'll be able to see it.
Yes, so if you're madly scribbling down that number, don't worry. The last slide in the slide deck has all of our contact details to make it easier for you. But the other thing that we actually do is to ensure that only those not-for-profits that are eligible to tax concessions are actually accessing those tax concessions. So the Australian policy settings are such that not-for-profits actually receive significant tax concessions in the system, and you'll be able to see those in a few minutes. So part of our role is to provide that, confidence to the community and to the government that only those that are eligible to access those concessions are actually accessing them. So we support the not-for-profit sector, but we also need to provide integrity in the tax and super systems to provide that confidence to the government. So does that make sense?
Completely.
So let's move on. Probably one of the questions that I get is, so tell us a little bit about the population. And so this slide here, Mustafa, really looks at the population of not-for-profits. And even before, as we were preparing for this presentation, you just assumed that all not-for-profits are charities, right? So let's have a look. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that we recognise that there are 224,000 not-for-profits that are registered in the system with an ABN. And then there are probably some other not-for-profits that are operating in the tax system. They don't have an ABN. They're not required to have an ABN because they don't employ anyone. They don't probably interact with business where they are required to have an ABN. So there are some smaller not-for-profits. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to concentrate on the 224,000 that are registered in the system with an ABN. So if we take that population of about 224,000 not-for-profits, they split into three groups, and this is really important. So the first group are endorsed tax concession charities. So these are not-for-profits that are registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission and endorsed by the ATO to have an income tax exemption, right? And there's about 57,000 of those, or 26%. In fact, I think that number has crept up to 60,000 since the new reporting requirements have come into place. So about 60,000 not-for-profits are registered with the ACNC as a charity, right? Then you have about 4% of not-for-profits that are actually taxable. So this is something that most people have an aha moment. It's like, oh, I didn't know that some not-for-profits were taxable. So about 10,000 are taxable not-for-profits. But the vast majority, and this is why we're having this presentation, the vast majority of not-for-profits are what we refer to as self-assessing income tax exempt not-for-profits. And there's about 155,000 of those in the system. And so who are these not-for-profits? These are not-for-profits that, by virtue of the tax law, they meet one of the 8 categories in the tax law. And you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen. So the 8 categories are community service, sporting, cultural, which go mainly to the arts, cultural, educational, health, employment, scientific and resource development. But the 3 main categories are community service organisations, sporting and cultural. That's where the main players are there. And so this is an important now distinction, Mustafa, and we'll probably reinforce it a few times over the course of the discussion. The 8 categories, so there are only really 2 pathways for a not-for-profit to be income tax exempt. So there's two pathways. One is that you're registered with the ACNC and endorsed by the ATO as being income tax exempt. And the second pathway is that you meet one of those 8 categories in the tax law. Now, if you don't meet one of those two pathways, you are a taxable not-for-profit. And so if you're a taxable not-for-profit, you may be required to lodge an income tax return if your taxable income is greater than $416. For those not-for-profit companies that have taxable income less than $416, they can lodge a non-lodgement advice. And I'm happy to share that as of, I think it was Monday afternoon, we've just published our pro forma to make it easy for not-for-profits to lodge that non-lodgement advice with the ATO. And we'll share that in our newsletter.
Perfect.
So let's move then to the income tax obligations, because I think this is a little bit of an aha moment because, as I said, probably one of the key things for not-for-profits to take from this session is to understand that there are only two pathways to income tax exemption. One, that you're registered with the ACNC, or two, that you meet one of those 8 categories that I just went through. And if you don't meet one of those two pathways, you are a taxable not-for-profit. But a lot of not-for-profits actually don't realise that even if they are registered with the ACNC and they're meeting the governance obligations that you have as a registered charity, you still have obligations in the tax and super system. This is particularly the case if you are employing staff. And a fun fact here, Mustafa, about not-for-profits actually employ about 10% of Australia's workforce. So we have some very significant employer obligations in the tax system. So this is a bit of a nifty slide here that we've provided on the screen, and I don't intend to go through it in detail for the purposes of this presentation, other than to say that we've split the reporting obligations that each of those 3 categories have. So if you're a charity, you need to meet the ACNC reporting obligations, so you're lodging an annual information statement on an annual basis, but you also need to meet all of your ATO super and tax obligations. Now, one of the common questions that we get is, so if I'm a charity, do I need to lodge this new NFP self-review report return that I've heard about? No. So if you're a registered charity with the ACNC, you're already reporting via an annual information statement. The new reporting requirements don't apply to you. So you can see there on the screen that we've also provided the obligations for those that are self-assessing as income tax exempt and for taxable not-for-profits. And we've also provided the links to our web guidance so that people can obtain further information. Probably one of the important things on this slide is the annual review. Now, this is all part of good governance. The one thing that the new reporting requirements have actually brought to the fore is, one, that there are a whole lot of misconceptions in the sector. So most not-for-profits, and we did some independent research a couple of years ago, which told us that many not-for-profits in the community think that because they're a not-for-profit, they're just exempt all taxes. And that's not the case, as you can see from this slide. So there were some misconceptions, and so we know that the new reporting requirements have actually caused people to think about updating their contact details, looking at their governing documents, their constitution, to make sure that the purpose for which they were established is aligned with the activities that they're currently undertaking. So we really do recommend that on an annual basis, at the very least, a not-for-profit really looks at their organisation's purpose and activities, and whenever they make changes to their governing rules, structures or activities. So if you've got some major changes in your organisation, you should be really updating your purpose and really looking at whether you still meet the requirements, for example, of being a charitable organisation or an organisation that self-assesses as income tax exempt. And we will also be publishing, I'm not going to let you get a word in edgewise, am I?
I'll get there.
We will be publishing our checklist to help not-for-profits to actually, sort of navigate through all of these different things that I'm talking about.
Perfect. I just wanted to remind those who may have joined us a little bit later, if there's any questions you have to submit, slido.com. That's slido.com with the hashtag ATO requirements. And we'll take those questions shortly as well. But if there's anything that comes up during the presentation, please submit those.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mustafa. So we might move then to the new reporting requirements. And so the next couple of slides really look at the new reporting requirements. So one of the questions that I often get, Mustafa, is, why now? What is this new reporting requirement about? The one thing that I will say is that the law hasn't changed. The law has not changed. So what has changed is that not-for-profits that self-assess as income tax exempt now need to just notify the ATO about which category they're actually self-assessing as income tax exempt. And so what we've heard from the sector is, well, what happens if I don't meet one of those 8 categories? Well, there's nothing to fear. If you've made a mistake, we will help you get it right. So you can still lodge the return. There is a selection, a box in section 2 of the return that actually says, I don't meet any of the above categories. You can tick that box. You can lodge the return with the ATO, and we will provide you information with the next steps that you need to take. So the one thing that I'll say right from the get-go is that if you find that you've made a mistake and that you're not eligible to self-assess as income tax exempt, you don't have anything to fear, unless, of course, there is fraud or evasion, then really all bets are off. But we know that most not-for-profits are trying to do the right thing. I think I've worked in many of the market segments in the Australian community, and it is one of the most conscientious sectors that I've worked in. I know that not-for-profits really want to get it right. So, and we want to help you get it right. So that is the main message that I want to put out there. But so the new reporting requirements, they were announced as part of the 21-22 federal budget. And so since that time, since early 22, we have been working with the sector to get more information, and we've designed the return in consultation with the sector. So let's move then to look at what the return actually looks like. So there are 3 sections in the return. It is an easy return to complete. Even though it is an income tax return, it is not financial in nature. It is just an informational return. But because it is a return that looks at income tax obligations, it is an income tax return. So it looks like a normal return that you would lodge with the ATO. So there are 3 sections in the return. One is the organisational details. So most not-for-profits will know their organisational details. We do ask not-for-profits to actually estimate their annual gross revenue range, being small, medium or large, and most not-for-profits will know that. So if you're a small not-for-profit, you will know whether you have a revenue range under 150,000, and we expect that those that are medium and large will also know their revenue range. And that's just so that we can identify how big these organisations are, so that we can tailor our support with those organisations in a better manner. The second section is really around the income tax exemption category. So there are about 5 questions in this section, and they're primarily yes or no style answers, right? So again, very easy. If you are filling the return in our online services platform, it's really cool because when you get to those questions, you can hover and it'll come up with information to guide you. So it will give you some prompts. Unfortunately, we can't do that in other platforms, but in our online services platform, you do have that functionality. It links you to guidance so that it assists you in completing the return. And then the final section is your summary and declaration, right, that you make to the ATO. Now, because it is an income tax return, it's part of our tax time. So it opens on 1 July, finishes on 31st of October each year. But because we know that this was the first year that many not-for-profits have turned their mind to looking at whether they're in fact eligible to self-assess as income tax exempt, we've actually extended the due date until the 31st of March 2025 next year. Now, I am happy to say, Mustafa, that about 14,500 not-for-profits have already lodged their not-for-profit self-review return. So to all of those, I say thank you. And to those of you that are trying to lodge the return, I would just say make note of all of the information that we're providing. But where you're finding it particularly difficult, there are a number of options for you to reach out to us and seek more information. So probably a couple of things that I'd like to point out on this slide. We are taking a really practical compliance approach. Now, we know that some not-for-profits may not be eligible for an income tax exemption by virtue of one of those 8 categories. Again, I'd like to say that you don't need to be fearful of that because we will be focusing all of our compliance resources on the forward years, right? So, there is really nothing that you need to sort of worry about there. How to get ready? So one of the things that we have been hearing is that whilst the return itself is easy to complete, there's a few steps that not-for-profits need to take, and that's what's taking a little bit of time. So if you have an ABN, it is a legislative requirement to keep your contact details up to date anytime that there has been a significant change. And in fact, it's probably, again, as part of good hygiene, you should be sort of reviewing those details on an annual basis. But we know that there are many not-for-profits that haven't checked their contact details for years. In fact, one not-for-profit, hadn't updated their details for the last 20 years, for example. And so in order to change your registration details in the ABR, you ordinarily would need to order a form from the ATO, and for security purposes, we have to mail that form out to you. You then complete it and then you mail it back to us. So it takes quite a bit of time. And so what we've done to assist not-for-profits as part of this process is we've made that change of registration detail form available as a downloadable PDF form on our website, which means that you can go to the link that's provided in the presentation pack. You can complete your details in the change of registration detail form, then you can print it, and then you will need to mail it to us so that we can process. And then we will actually contact you. So it is really important that you check that we've got correct phone numbers and email addresses so that we can confirm that your details are up to date. Now, on that change of registration detail form, you will notice that there is a little sort of disclaimer thing on there that says that only an authorised contact can actually complete that form. I want you to ignore that for the purposes of this exercise, because this is another thing that we have put in place to assist not-for-profits. If you are a newly appointed authorised contact and you have evidence of that, which could be the minutes from a meeting, for example, or a letter from one of your associates in a not-for-profit, as long as you attach that evidence to the back of the form, we will accept that as a form to be updated. So really important, change of registration detail form. You can complete it by downloading it from our web pages. Attach evidence that you are a newly appointed authorised contact. We will update the details in the system and then we'll confirm those with you.
If you go back one slide, I do like that first point, which is education and support rather than a penalty first approach for the income year as well. You're here to help.
Absolutely. I know that it's hard to believe. People say that they are fearful of the ATO, as you know. I am as well sometimes. But we really are here to support not-for-profits get it right going forward. So that is a really good point, Mustafa, to sort of make. And I suppose, Mustafa, the next slide really goes to seeking support and staying informed. So I promised that we'd give you all of the contact details. So you can see there on the left-hand side, we've got all of the ATO website materials. You also can conduct an early self-review using our guide, and you can see the web handle there, ato.gov.au/NFP self-review guide. So for those not-for-profits that want to have a look at whether they meet one of those 8 categories before they actually lodge the return, they can actually go through the guide. The guide has the exact questions that you'll see in the return itself. We've also provided the link to the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission website. If you're a charitable organisation or you think you've got charitable purposes, you can go to the ACNC website. I've already mentioned, Mustafa, that the ATO maintains a not-for-profit advice service. Now that operates Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and that's 1300 130 248, and that is my dedicated team in Parramatta, and I also have a team in the Sydney office as well. The other thing you can see there that I actually publish my phone number and email address, so if all else fails, I am happy to receive inquiries through my office. I also have a LinkedIn contact detail there because we push out a lot of socials through our LinkedIn account as well. And probably the last thing that I'd probably like to say, Mustafa, before we go to questions is, for those not-for-profits that are on the line, think about subscribing to our not-for-profit newsletter. The details are on the right-hand side of the screen. Couple of advantages there. You get to hear from me on a monthly basis about what's happening. But also we publish quite a lot of really helpful information articles that are targeting just not-for-profits. So you get to hear about all of the other obligations that may apply to you, or any other important information that we need to sort of push out to the sector. So Mustafa, that sort of covers the main things that I wanted to sort of go through, but very happy to hear whether you've got any questions.
Yeah, look, I might go to some questions. That was a great presentation. I know how hard it is out there at the moment to run a charity. It's been a tough few years.
Yeah.
But you'll never find more purpose-driven, fantastic people in organisations.
Agreed.
So however you can help, that's fantastic. Might just kick off, I guess, with the first question, which is around, is this going to be as complex every year? Like, is this year the worst year? Is this the easiest year?
Yeah, so great question, Mustafa. Look, I would have to say, if I put myself in the position of a not-for-profit, for example, and as I've said, I've been on the boards of several not-for-profits, this is going to be probably the hardest year for not-for-profits, especially for those that haven't kept their details up to date, because you will need to update your details in the ABR and make sure that your authorised contacts are up to date. Now, the return itself, it has been designed to be lodged using online services for business, right? But in order to get access to online services for business, your authorised contact needs to, use their My ID to link their not-for-profit's ABN into our systems, which is our relationship authorisation manager system. And so that's a little bit of a process. So there's a couple of steps there. And then once that's done, they can get access to online services for business. Now, of course, if not-for-profits have a tax agent, a registered tax agent, they can lodge the return on behalf of the not-for-profit. But to make it easier, once again, for not-for-profits, we have introduced for this transitional year a self-help phone service. So for those not-for-profits that are struggling to get access to online services for business, you can lodge the return using our self-help phone service, which is 137226. You call that number, but you will need a unique identifier from the ATO, which is really a number that's on any correspondence that you've received from the ATO, any previous correspondence that you've received.
So they struggle to get into the online portal, they can't figure it out, they can do
They can do the
And was that number on the slide before?
Yes, it is. It is on the slide.
So it's the same number?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I guess the question, we come back to that point you had earlier about you're here to help, not to punish.
That's right.
Run us through, what happens if they find that they've made a mistake? What's kind of the remedial process there?
So there are probably two things that could happen in the return. So as I said to you right at the beginning, there is a misconception that if I'm a not-for-profit, I'm exempt all taxes. But remember the two pathways. You can only get income tax exemption if you are registered with the ACNC or meet one of those 8 categories. And so we know that in the 155,000 that are currently self-assessing as income tax exempt, we know that there are some in that population that may have only charitable purpose. And we know this because we're working with them at the moment, and we're working with the ACNC as well. So we know that there are some there. Now, in the return itself, there is a question that asks, do you have charitable purpose, right? And you can answer one of 3 ways. You can say yes, no, or unsure. So if it's no, you're fine. If it's yes or unsure, we will actually sort of ring fence those taxpayers, and we will work with them and the ACNC to transition them across to the ACNC if they meet the requirements to be a registered charity, right? So that's the first thing. Conversely, for those not-for-profits that don't have charitable purpose and don't meet one of those 8 categories, they can tick, remember I said earlier that you can tick none of the above. I don't meet any of the above categories. Again, we will ring fence those taxpayers, and we will work with them to transition them to being a taxable organisation. And just because you're a taxable organisation doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be paying any income tax. So you've got to work out your taxable information, your taxable income, and you do this by applying the mutuality principle. And so all of that information is on our web pages. And as I said before, for those not-for-profits that have taxable income less than $416, and many of our not-for-profits will, because they do apply the mutuality principle, they will be able to lodge a non-lodgement advice, which, as I said, we've provided in a bit of a pro forma to make it easier. So again, the key message, Mustafa, is that if you've made a mistake, don't worry, we will work with you. I mean, I have said in my newsletters that we will literally hold your hand and walk you through the next steps in the system.
Fantastic. There's a specific question that's come online, which is, has anything changed for membership-based organisations? I guess this might go to the disclaimer, it's very specific. Is still taxed on non-member income only? Is non-member income only taxed?
Yes, that's right. So the mutuality principle basically is a principle that sort of says that if the income that you're receiving is just from your members, you know, that income is not taxed. So that it does not form part of your assessable income. So if your not-for-profit has just member fees coming in and you're not having any other revenue coming in from any other forum, chances are that you will be under that $416 threshold. However, having said that, I know that some not-for-profits have, you know, money in the bank, for example. And so if you've got money in the bank and you're earning interest on that money, the revenue stream from that interest does form part of your assessable income, and it could tip you over that taxable income threshold of $416. So I think the key thing here, the starting point, so for any not-for-profit, the starting point is, you know, what is your purpose? What are your activities? That gives you a sense of, well, what type of not-for-profit am I? Am I a charitable not-for-profit? Am I a taxable one? Or am I one that can self-assess as income tax exempt? So once you've worked all of that out, and if you're a taxable not-for-profit in particular, you need to look at, where is my revenue coming from? So am I having functions where I have members and non-members attending? And how do I apportion my expenses and the revenue with respect to those functions? And so if you think about automotive clubs, for example, they will have a rally once a year. And so that rally will have members and non-members. So how do they apportion that revenue and the expenses associated with that rally to ensure that they get it right going forward?
Sounds good. I guess a lot of the question is, a lot of charities will be asking, I've had it really tough. The last few years, it's been harder than ever to run a charity. Why has this come through? Why now?
Yeah. So again, Mustafa, firstly, yes, I do accept it is a really challenging economic environment, and particularly all businesses, and particularly for not-for-profits. And I said before that in the ATO, we really do acknowledge the important services that not-for-profits actually provide to the Australian community. So why now? So the issue over the last few years, there have been a number of reforms in the not-for-profit sector, and that's really with respect to improving transparency and integrity, if you like. So for those not-for-profits that are self-assessing as income tax exempt, they haven't had to report anything in the past, right? So we had very limited information about them. And now we know that some of them should have been registered with the ACNC, some of them are taxable, and not all of them meet the requirements of one of those 8 categories. So really the measure or the new reporting requirements were brought into place to address transparency and integrity in the system, really with respect to ensuring that only those that are eligible to receive those income tax exemptions are actually receiving those income tax exemptions.
Fantastic. And tell me more about your team in Parramatta and Sydney. They're there, they pick up the phone calls relatively quickly.
Yeah.
What are they there to help not-for-profits with?
They're a great team, and I think many of our not-for-profits that have dealt in particular with our Parramatta team, who have been there for quite a long time, will attest to the fact that they're very helpful. So they provide general advice and guidance for not-for-profits, anything from, you know, I think I'm a not-for-profit, how do I go about registering the system, what are my obligations? So they will provide general advice and guidance with respect to your obligation, setting up a not-for-profit, any obligations that you might have, you know, what you need to think about, etc., etc. They will also provide a warm transfer into the ACNC and guide you with respect to who to go to and who to speak to about anything to do with charitable requirements. But they also endorse deductible gift recipients. And so a deductible gift recipient is a not-for-profit organisation that can receive donations from donors that can be deducted on the donor's income tax return. Now, not all not-for-profits, you know, can have this DGR status, the
It's quite
deductible.
a prize status.
Yes, so it is. In fact, most not-for-profits that have deductible gift recipient status have to be registered with the Australian Charities Not-for-Profit Commission as a charity to receive that status. But we also have some specifically listed DGRs in the tax law. So these are the ones that the government decides they don't meet one of the 52 categories in tax law, and so they specifically list them themselves. So, you know, that is a special sort of concession that's made available to not-for-profits. So my staff actually provide a lot of guidance with respect to the obligations that a DGR has, but also provides not-for-profits with advice and guidance on how to go about getting DGR status, for example.
That's
right?
Really
so
useful,
yeah, they do provide a lot of that advice, and of course they also endorse our not-for-profits for any tax concessions in the system as well.
Fantastic. And I guess just on that, what are the common issues that you're seeing coming through the call centre? What are some of the common issues that charities are facing? Because I think online, if you're running a not-for-profit for yourself, you kind of don't know what others are experiencing out there. I think there's probably a shared kind of benefit in knowing what some of the common issues are.
Yeah, so probably some of the common issues that we're seeing is purpose and activities. So I think I mentioned this right at the beginning. A not-for-profit generally starts out, you know, usually in someone's lounge room, great cause, and over the course of years, it ends up morphing into quite a sophisticated organisation. So some of the questions that we do receive is, my activities no longer reflect my purpose. You know, how do I, you know, fix my constitution, my governing governing documents, what needs to be in there. So really important that not-for-profits actually review that on an annual basis. The two clauses that all not-for-profits need to have in their governing documents is, of course, that the purpose one, which is around that any revenue that is made by that not-for-profit must go back to the purpose for which that not-for-profit was established, and the wind-up clause. And this is the clause that says, so in the event, for whatever reason, that not-for-profit winds up, that any residual surpluses will be donated to another not-for-profit of a similar sort of making. So, that purpose question, the wind-up clauses, all of those sorts of things, what needs to be my governing documents, that's a question that my staff often receive. Obviously, at the moment, we are just fielding thousands of calls with respect to the new reporting requirements. So,
understandable.
Everything to do with, I can't update my, authorised contact, details. I can't get, my ABN linked to the RAM. Help me with that. I just can't work out the system. I can't navigate the system. So it really does depend. And so we have our team actually sort of methodically works through how we go about not only providing that advice, but in some, cases, we actually take that information in the call itself and actually give them clear passage through.
Fantastic. Look, we're getting towards the end of today's session. Just one final reminder, if there's any burning questions, slido.com, we'll put that up on the screen now, hashtag ATO requirements. We've got a few more minutes for some questions. The other question that kind of comes to mind is you've got charities going through this system. They've got to the 31st of March. How many are you hoping will do it in the next the message is do it now. How long will it take?
Yeah. So, Mustafa, remembering charities are not lodging this new reporting requirement, right? So it's the self-assessing income tax
terminology is
exempt.
important. Yes. Yep.
Sorry. So charities, you're not lodging this
Classic
new
ATO,
return. It's really those that are self-assessing as income tax exempt. Look. You do, not-for-profits do have until the 31st of March next year, but what we are saying is don't delay. If you're ready to lodge, lodge now, because the sooner you lodge, even if you've made a mistake, the sooner we can help correct it and work through it, because before you know it, the next lodgement will be due, right? So my first key message would be really don't delay your lodgement. The second key message is probably around preparing. Right? So there's a lot of information, like we're conveying information in this presentation, but we also have an ATO TV where we've recorded 3 webinars that actually work you through each of the steps. So, get informed and prepare for your lodgement. So take a little bit of time out to prepare for your lodgement, make sure that you've got everything ready. Again, the third step, reviewing your governing documents. Remember, it's all about purpose and activities. It's all about making sure that you're reviewing that. I would recommend, as part of good governance, good hygiene check, to do that on an annual basis at the very minimum. Call us on 1300 130 248 if you're having trouble. And the final thing is don't panic, right? So these are probably the key things that I would like to convey to the audience today.
And I guess, how long will it take to submit it? So you've done all your work,
so
you've got your paperwork.
The return itself, the actual physical return.
Once you've logged in, you're in there.
So once you've done all of those steps, which can take a little bit of time to do, I'm not going to lie, but once you've done all of that, the return takes less than 10 minutes.
Fantastic.
And 10 minutes is, I'm sort of exceeding
slowly
that.
Going through the form, reading every word.
But it takes less than 10 minutes. In fact, one of my directors advises me that it can take up to literally 5 minutes. It's a pretty quick and easy return
once you do the homework
to actually lodge. And again, you can lodge it yourself using online services for business. That is the best way to do it. You can also use your registered tax agent. They can lodge it using online services for agent. But if you don't have access to online services for whatever reason, you can use our self-help phone service.
For this year only?
Yeah, only for this year though.
So get in there. Look, I think that kind of will bring us to the end. We've heard your final message. I think the message is clear. Get in there, report early, do what you need to do, and you're here to help. The contact details will be sent around. Not-for-profits are really important to ensuring much of our economy keeps running. So I know you're there to help.
We are. We really are.
Yeah. So look, I might just wrap up there. I just want to thank everyone for joining. If you do have any other questions, please do put it into the Slido. We'll have a look later today. We'll get you all the questions. Anything
that'd be
that's come
great.
through, we can send the responses to all our members that are online. But again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll have a link online if you want to watch this again. Also, you'll receive a feedback survey after this event as well. If there's any feedback you have for how we can do a slightly better job of this, continuous feedback is always really important for us. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mustafa.
No worries. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.